It seems like everywhere you turn now, whether it's new construction popping up around town or just listening to conversations about urban planning, these terms like sustainable, resilient, even regenerative design keep coming up, right? It really feels like a pretty fundamental shift in what we're starting to expect from our buildings and how they actually shape the environment around them. Like, we're not just talking about basic shelter anymore.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's this, I think, growing understanding that the way we approach design and construction, it doesn't just impact what happens inside those four walls. It has these massive ripple effects, way beyond that. And with all the planetary challenges we're facing, there's a real urgency to rethink how buildings perform, especially in terms of their environmental impact.
So let's sort of try to unpack some of that jargon a bit because it can get a little overwhelming, right? We've got sustainable development, then there's regenerative design, resilient design, and then on top of that, you've got these process terms like integrated design process, IDP for short, and then integrated project delivery, IPD.
Yeah.
So what are we actually talking about with all these terms? And how do they connect in the real world? Because this isn't just a bunch of architects sketching alone in their studios, is it? This feels much bigger.
Oh, it definitely is much bigger. I mean, these ideas, they're all super interconnected. And like you said, they go way beyond just the world of architecture. They're forcing us to think in a much more integrated way, across different fields, to actually see those connections between our human-made systems and the natural world and how technology fits into all of this. So today, what we want to do is really give you a solid understanding of these concepts and why they matter so much, especially if we're going to create buildings and environments that are actually better for the future for everyone.
Right, let's start with the basics then. What about sustainable development? We hear that one all the time. What's the core idea there?
The definition that's kind of become the gold standard, it goes back to the Brundtland Commission report. This was back in the late 80s. And they define sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
Yeah, makes sense.
And think about it, so many buildings that were designed even just 20 years ago, they're already struggling to meet today's energy efficiency standards. And they often require these super expensive retrofits just to catch up. So even back then, the Brundtland definition was sort of a warning, a warning against that kind of short-sighted thinking. And it's an insight that's honestly become even more urgent over time.
Right. But I've also heard people say that just aiming for sustainable isn't enough anymore. What's driving that shift in thinking? Why do we need to go further?
It's a really crucial point. While sustainability is all about doing less harm, using resources more efficiently, there's a growing realization that with the scale of the environmental challenges that we're facing now, climate change, the loss of biodiversity, dwindling resources, just sustaining the current situation may actually not be enough. It's like we're treading water at best, and we need to be swimming towards a better shore.
So that's where regenerative design comes in, right? Going beyond just minimizing the bad to actively doing good, actually making things better.
Exactly. Regenerative design takes the essence of sustainability and kind of pushes it to that next level. It's not just about reducing negative impacts. It's about actively working to restore natural systems, replenish resources, even going beyond that. So it's like shifting from a do no harm mindset to one that's focused on healing, on renewal, actively improving the environment around us.
I like that. It's ambitious though, right?
Yeah.
How does that actually play out in building design? Give me a sense of what that looks like. I mean, beyond just adding a green roof, which is great, what's a surprising way a building could actually regenerate its environment?
Well, Bill Reed and Tamala Mang, who have done a lot of work on regenerative development, they talk about needing this deep, integrated, whole systems approach. Their argument is that we need to design our human systems, and that includes buildings and cities, in a way that allows them to actually co-evolve with natural systems. So it's about creating these mutually beneficial relationships, which ultimately leads to greater resilience for both. It's about creating that win-win scenario for everyone.
Can you give me a real-world example? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Sure. So imagine a building that's designed to filter and clean rainwater runoff, right? It does it in a way that actually improves the quality of the local watershed. Or let's say a building that incorporates habitat features specifically designed for native species, so it's actually boosting biodiversity in the surrounding area. Those are just a couple of examples, but it's really about how human systems and natural systems can not just coexist, but actually thrive together.
So if I'm understanding this right, sustainable design is thinking about a building's life cycle. right? From cradle to grave, from extracting the raw materials to eventually demolishing it. But what about regenerative design? How does it look at that life cycle?
You hit the nail on the head with that cradle to grave thing for sustainable design. Regenerative design kind of flips that script and asks us to think about cradle to cradle opportunities. So it's asking, can we design systems where materials are continuously cycled, kind of mimicking the way natural processes work, where there's no such thing as waste? Can buildings become part of the ecosystem, actively contributing to its health rather than just being these kind of static structures?
It's interesting, this idea of regeneration, it's popping up in other fields too, like you mentioned, restorative justice or permaculture. It's like this underlying principle of renewal and interconnectedness is gaining traction across the board.
It really is. And the core principles of regenerative design, I mean, these are things like integrated whole systems thinking, creating self-feeding and self-regenerating processes, and that real deep synthesis of our built environments with natural systems. These are ideas that are relevant to any discipline, I think, that's struggling with, how to create positive change that actually lasts.
All right, so we've got sustainability as minimizing the bad, regeneration as actively doing good. Where does resilience fit into all of this?
Resilience in design, it's all about adaptability. It's about the capacity to adapt to changing conditions and, crucially, to maintain those essential functions when things get rough. The Resilient Design Institute, they define it as, let me get the quote right, the capacity to adapt to changing conditions and to maintain or regain functionality and vitality in the face of stress or disturbance. It is the capacity to bounce back after a disturbance or interruption.
That seems so relevant now, especially with the increasing frequency of severe weather events we're seeing. It feels like the way we've built things in the past just wasn't designed to handle those kinds of shocks.
Right. And, historically, I think planning often prioritized immediate economic benefits, and sometimes that came at the expense of thinking about long-term resilience. So, with the rise in these extreme weather events, we're really seeing the vulnerabilities in a lot of our infrastructure. And it's a huge wake-up call that we need to start designing for a future that's likely to be more unpredictable, with more disruptions. For example, think about what happens if a project gets hit by unexpected delays because of a major weather event, something we just talked about with resilience. How does that shared risk actually play out in practice? I mean, with these newer project delivery methods, it's not just about sharing the profits, it's also about navigating those tough challenges together, right?
Yeah. Now, the Resilient Design Institute, they've laid out these 10 principles of resilient design, right? Do we need to go through all 10 of those right now?
Probably not necessary to go into detail on all 10 right now, but it's good to know they exist. They provide a really valuable framework for thinking about how to design and build in a way that anticipates and can actually respond to a whole range of potential stresses, from natural disasters to resource shortages. These principles are they should be key considerations throughout the entire design process.
Okay. So just make sure I'm following along here. Sustainability, regeneration, resilience, these are all adding layers of complexity to what we expect from buildings and the spaces we create. It's not just about how it looks or whether it functions at a basic level anymore.
That's a great way to put it. We're factoring in the environmental footprint, the potential for restoring ecosystems, and the ability to withstand and recover from, all kinds of disruptions. And a crucial part of this is ensuring that these spaces are accessible and equitable for everyone who uses them. It's a whole new way of thinking about design.
And that level of integration, it sounds like it requires a huge amount of coordination between everyone involved. I mean, you can't really achieve these kinds of outcomes if everyone's just working in their own silo, right?
Exactly. I mean, at the heart of all of this, if we're talking about sustainable, regenerative, resilient development, it all boils down to deep, genuine collaboration between all of the different people who are part of a project. Creating a culture where everyone feels like their voice is heard, that their expertise is valued right from the start, that's absolutely critical. And there's this great example from the Integrative Design Guide to Green Building that really illustrates this. It's about
Oh, is that the anecdote you mentioned about paint color?
Yes, exactly. So the design team was making the seemingly simple decision about paint colors for a space. But through their collaborative process, they realized that the reflective value of the paint they chose, it actually had a direct impact on how much natural light could be used. And the seemingly small detail, it had these ripple effects. They could reduce the number of artificial light fixtures, which then lowered energy consumption, reduced the load on the HVAC system, and get this, it even led to cost savings overall because they could then optimize other building systems. It's just this perfect example of how interconnected everything is in a building and how challenging those initial assumptions through real collaboration can lead to these amazing outcomes that benefit everyone.
It's amazing how something as simple as paint color can have that much impact. So who needs to be part of this collaboration? Who are the key
Mhm.
players?
Well, you absolutely need full engagement from the project owner because they set the vision, they provide the resources, right? And then you need the decision makers from all the key stakeholder groups. We're talking about the architects, the engineers, specialist consultants, especially those with expertise in things like ecology or energy modeling. And then you need the people who are going to actually use the building, the contractors who are going to build it, and even all the tradespeople who are involved in the construction process. Each of these perspectives brings something vital to the table, and the owner plays a crucial role in nurturing this collaborative environment by being really clear about the project goals, understanding how everything is interconnected, and then committing the necessary resources to actually make it happen.
Makes sense. The owner's buy-in is key from the start. But what happens once the building's finished? Does that collaborative spirit just disappear?
Ideally, not at all, because even though the potential for sustainability or regeneration is designed into the project, whether it actually achieves those goals over the long term really depends on how the owner and the occupants operate and manage the building throughout its entire life. It's an ongoing commitment, not just a one-time thing.
It sounds like creating this culture of deep collaboration is a lot of work. It doesn't just happen magically, right?
Yeah.
What are some strategies to make it happen?
You're absolutely right. High-performing teams and that kind of genuine collaboration, they take real intentional effort and investment. This can involve things like dedicated team building activities, training that helps people understand different perspectives and value interdisciplinary thinking, and really fostering empathy among team members. Because it's not just about the technical skills, it's about the human element too. And then beyond those individual efforts, you need the right organizational structures in place, clear communication systems, well-defined management processes. It's about creating the infrastructure that supports team cohesion and effective decision-making. And this is where concepts like the integrated design process, IDP, and integrated project delivery, IPD, come into play. They provide frameworks for making this happen.
All right, let's dive into those. What's the integrated design process, or IDP?
The integrated design process, or IDP, is basically a structured approach to collaboration that's rooted in what we call whole systems thinking. It's a way to systematically explore and uncover all the different relationships and interdependencies between all the elements of a building project, the human, natural, and technological systems. It's about seeing the big picture.
And what do we mean by whole systems thinking in this context? I mean, what does that actually look like in practice?
The University of British Columbia has a good definition. They describe it as a method to understand how things, elements, and systems are related and how they influence one another within a whole. So think about how things like water, sun, soil, air, plants, animals, and humans interact and support one another as a system. And then you apply that to a building project. So instead of just optimizing, say, the HVAC system in isolation, you think about how its design impacts things like natural light, the choice of materials, even the well-being of the people inside. It's always about finding solutions that create benefits across the whole system, not just for one part of it.
So IDP is a way to apply that holistic thinking to a specific project. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. The organizational theorist Russell Ackoff, he talked about what he called messes. These are basically systems of interconnected problems where you can't solve just one problem in isolation without considering the others. The IDP provides a framework for tackling these kinds of messes, to support that holistic thinking as we try to find the best design solutions. It's about really digging deep to understand all the stakeholders' needs and interests, documenting them carefully, and then analyzing those to figure out how to create the most effective integrated design.
Now, when you say stakeholders, who are we talking about? It's more than just the people who use the building, right?
Definitely. In this context, stakeholders include anyone who might have an impact on the project or who might be affected by its outcomes, whether directly or indirectly. So this could include future generations, people in the surrounding neighborhood, the wider community, even local ecosystems. It's about thinking broadly about who has a stake in this project and how they might be impacted.
What are some things that make IDP successful? What needs to be in place for it to work well?
Well, there are a few key factors. You usually need someone skilled at facilitating these kinds of collaborative discussions, someone who can keep things moving and make sure everyone's voice is heard. Then, strong interpersonal skills among all the team members are crucial. It's about fostering open communication, mutual respect, being able to really listen to and understand different perspectives. Of course, you need active and ongoing engagement from the project owner. Strong design leadership is also crucial, someone who can really champion this integrated approach. And then it's about influencing decisions through understanding and collaboration, rather than just top-down authority. The goal isn't to dictate a specific outcome from the start. It's about using this process to uncover the real needs, expectations, limitations, and constraints of the project. And then you use that understanding to collaboratively establish clear, shared goals.
Sounds like shifting to IDP might change the way work gets done on a project, the kind of timeline of things.
It definitely does. You tend to have a much more intensive workload in the early pre-design phases of a project when you're using IDP. But that thorough exploration and analysis up front, it means that by the time you get to the later stages, like construction documentation, a lot of the key decisions have already been made in a really informed way. This often leads to fewer surprises and less rework down the line. So it's really an investment up front that pays off in the long run.
So IDP focuses on that collaborative thinking, the information gathering. What about integrated project delivery, IPD? Where does that fit in?
Integrated Project Delivery, or IPD, is more focused on the contractual and managerial framework. It's specifically structured to support that deep collaboration we were talking about. The key difference from traditional project delivery is the use of a single multi-party contract. So instead of having separate contracts between the client and the architect and the various consultants and so on, in an IPD approach, you have all the core parties, the client, the architect, the engineers, consultants, the general contractor, and often even the major trades, all bound together under one single contract.
That's a pretty big change from the way things are usually done. What's the thinking behind having that single contract? Why is that important?
The main idea is to really align the interests of everyone involved, get them all working together towards the same goals, and typically the single contract will include a shared profit model based on a formula that's established right at the beginning of the project. The goal is to optimize the design to meet the client's needs as effectively as possible, and that requires everyone to be on the same page. So the risk and reward, they're shared as well. If the project comes in under budget or achieves certain successes, those benefits are shared according to the agreed upon formula. And if there are challenges or cost overruns, those risks are also shared. It's about everyone being in it together, truly collaborating.
So it's not just about a different kind of contract. It changes the whole management structure of the project. How does that actually work on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, exactly. IPD usually involves a consensus-based management structure, often with multiple committees made up of people from all the different parties that are involved. These committees are responsible for things like overall planning, design decisions, construction logistics, and making sure the building systems are all working properly at the end. And the key here is that these committees have representatives from each of the parties who have real decision-making authority. So it's not just about giving input, it's about sharing the responsibility and making decisions together.
So if I'm understanding this right, IDP is more about the collaborative process of figuring out what needs to be done and how to do it, while IPD is more about setting up the legal and managerial structure that supports and incentivizes that collaboration.
That's a great way to put it. You're absolutely right. They are distinct but complementary approaches. While you can certainly use the principles of IBP within other project delivery methods, IPD is often seen as a particularly well-suited framework for really putting IDP into practice. When you combine them, you get this powerful methodology for delivering projects that are truly high-performing, sustainable, regenerative, and resilient. It's about creating the conditions for success.
And it all seemed to come back to setting those clear goals from the outset. How do you actually go about establishing sustainable and regenerative design criteria for a project? Where do you even start?
That's where it all begins, setting those measurable goals. And it has to be a collaborative effort involving everyone, the owner, the people who are going to use the building, the design team, the construction team. These goals might be based on the targets set by various green building certification programs, but they can also go further depending on the specific needs and aspirations of the project. It's about what's right for this particular building and this particular community.
So you're saying you really have to get everyone together at the beginning to figure out what they actually want and need. It's not just about checking boxes, it's about a deeper understanding.
Exactly. And at the very beginning, the project's scope might not be completely defined, and that's okay. You need that thorough exploration of what the project is really about. what the business case is, what all the stakeholders' needs are, both the things they explicitly say and the things that might be unspoken. And this early exploration phase, which is a key part of IDP, it can even uncover conflicts in those initial requirements. But that's a good thing because it gives you a chance to work through those conflicts, clarify everyone's understanding, and really identify what the true priorities are for the project.
You mentioned things like generating electricity on site or treating sewage on site as examples of things that might expand the scope of a typical project. How
Yeah.
do those kinds of things relate back to sustainability and regeneration?
Those features, they're often considered in projects that are really aiming for high levels of performance because they can significantly reduce a building's dependence on external resources. And sometimes they even allow you to create closed loop systems where you're not just minimizing waste, but actually reusing and recycling resources within the building itself. Like generating electricity on site reduces the demand on the grid,
Hmm.
and treating wastewater on site can allow you to reuse that water so you're minimizing both water consumption and discharge. So you're not just thinking about the building in isolation, you're thinking about its relationship to the larger infrastructure and the environment.
And I know a lot of clients who are committed to sustainability and regeneration. They often look to get certifications from organizations like GBCI Canada with their LEED and WELL programs or Green Globes. What's the role of those certifications in all of this?
Those certifications, they can be really helpful. Pursuing them can give you a clear framework of goals to work towards, and they offer third-party validation that you've actually achieved those goals, which can be valuable. But it's important to remember that those certifications, they define the specific targets you need to hit, but the how, figuring out the best strategies, the right technologies, the specific design solutions to actually get there, that's the challenge, and that's where the creativity of the design team and the collaboration with all the stakeholders comes in.
So just to sum it all up, we're talking about sustainable, regenerative, and resilient development as these overarching goals. But to achieve them, you need to break them down into specific, measurable targets that are informed by the needs of everyone involved. And while certification programs can be useful benchmarks, the actual journey to get there depends on the team's collaborative skills, their understanding of how everything is interconnected, and the processes they choose to follow, like IDP and IPD.
Absolutely. It's this beautiful synthesis of principles, processes, and people. The success in creating these high-performing buildings and environments, it ultimately comes down to the culture of the design and construction teams, their expertise, and their ability to work together effectively.
It's really about the human element at the end of the day, isn't it?
It really is.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful. It's really clarified how all these different concepts and processes are connected and why this integrated and collaborative approach is so crucial for the future of our built environment.
You know, it's fascinating to think about how these principles of integrated thinking and collaboration could be applied beyond building design. What if we took these ideas and applied them to other complex challenges in our lives and our work? What kind of unexpected benefits might we discover if we took a more holistic and interconnected approach to problem solving? It's something to think about.
It definitely is. It makes you wonder what we could achieve if we brought this kind of thinking to other fields. So if you've enjoyed this deep dive into sustainable, regenerative, and resilient design and the processes that make it all possible, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes where we explore even more about this fascinating world.